I kept my ex's ring. After our breakup, when my new boyfriend found it, I realized I'd been living a lie. The ring sat in my jewelry box for 2 years, nestled between a pair of pearl earrings my grandmother gave me and a silver bracelet I'd bought myself after my first promotion. A simple white gold band with a small diamond. Nothing extravagant, but beautiful in its quiet elegance. Most days, I forgot it was there. But sometimes, when I was searching for the right necklace or digging for those earrings that matched my navy dress, I'd catch a glimpse of it and feel that familiar twist in my chest. I should have given it back to him. I knew that. But somehow 2 years had passed, and there it remained. The morning everything changed started like any other Saturday in October. I was getting ready for my friend Kelly's wedding shower, searching through my jewelry box for something that would complement the burgundy dress I'd chosen. My boyfriend Garrett was in the bathroom, humming some tune I didn't recognize while he shaved. We'd been together for 8 months, and I was beginning to think he might be the one. He made me laugh. He was kind to my parents, and he had this way of making even mundane Saturday mornings feel special. "Hey babe," he called from the bathroom. "Have you seen my watch? The one with the leather band?" "Check the dresser," I called back, still rummaging through earrings. I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor, then the sound of him opening and closing drawers. "Found it," he said, and I smiled, picking up a pair of gold hoops that would work perfectly. That's when I heard the silence, not the comfortable quiet of a Saturday morning, but the heavy, loaded silence that comes before everything changes. I looked up to find Garrett standing in the doorway, my jewelry box in his hands. His face had gone pale, and he was staring down at something inside. "Milani," he said quietly, "what's this?" I knew before I even looked. The ring caught the morning light streaming through our bedroom window, throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "It's nothing," I managed. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. Garrett's eyes met mine, and I saw something shift in his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of something he'd been trying not to see. "This is an engagement ring," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "A woman doesn't keep nothing in her jewelry box for 2 years. 2 years. Had it really been that long? The number hit me like a physical blow. 2 years since everything fell apart with my ex-fiancé, and I'd been carrying this secret around like a stone in my pocket. "His name was Kenneth," I said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "We were engaged for 11 months. Garrett set the jewelry box down on the dresser and crossed his arms. 11 months, and you never mentioned him." The accusation in his voice made me defensive. "You never asked about my dating history. You didn't think I'd want to know that you were engaged to someone else?" His voice rose slightly, then he caught himself, running a hand through his hair. "Milani, we've been talking about moving in together, about the future, and you never once mentioned that you were engaged before?" I wanted to explain, to make him understand, but the words felt tangled in my throat. How could I tell him that I'd kept it secret because I was ashamed? That Kenneth had broken things off just 4 months before our wedding, and I'd never really dealt with what that meant. "It didn't work out," I said lamely. "Clearly," Garrett picked up the ring, turning it over in his fingers. "But you kept this. Why?" That was the question I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Why had I kept it? It wasn't about the money. Kenneth had good taste, but it wasn't an expensive ring. It wasn't about sentimentality either. Kenneth and I had been wrong for each other in almost every way that mattered. "I don't know," I whispered. But that wasn't true, and we both knew it. The truth was, I'd worn that ring for 11 months like armor. Every time someone complimented it. Every time a stranger smiled at me in the grocery store checkout line because they saw it on my finger, I felt like I belonged to something bigger than myself. I was no longer just Milani Rodriguez, marketing coordinator with a studio apartment and a habit of talking to her plants. I was Milani Rodriguez, engaged woman, someone worth choosing, someone building a life with another person. The ring had been my proof that I mattered, that I was lovable, that I was enough. Taking it off had felt like losing my identity. and keeping it had felt like holding on to some essential part of myself. Garrett sat down beside me on the bed, the ring still in his palm. "Tell me about him." So I did. I told him about Kenneth, the man I'd thought I wanted to marry, about how we'd met at a conference for marketing professionals, how he'd been so confident and put together that I'd felt lucky when he asked me out, how he'd proposed after 14 months of dating, in a restaurant downtown with a ring he'd chosen himself because he said he knew my taste better than I did. He probably did, I admitted, looking at the ring. I was so eager to be the kind of woman who deserved someone like him that I never stopped to think about whether I actually wanted to be with him. "What do you mean?" I thought about those 11 months of engagement. The way Kenneth would correct me when I told stories at dinner parties, subtle little adjustments to make me sound more impressive. The way he'd planned our entire wedding without asking what I wanted, because he said he had better connections and knew what would look good in the photos. The way I'd started to feel like I was disappearing, becoming some polished version of myself that he'd designed. He wanted to marry who he thought I could become, I said, and I wanted to be the kind of woman who could make someone like him happy. We were both in love with ideas of each other, not the actual people we were. Looking back, I could see how I'd twisted myself into knots, trying to be what Kenneth wanted. I'd started ordering wine at dinner instead of the craft beer I preferred, because he said it was more sophisticated. I'd bought clothes that made me feel like I was playing dress-up, but that earned his approval. I'd even changed the way I laughed, softer, more controlled, because he'd once mentioned that my real laugh was a bit much for formal settings. By the time he called off the engagement, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. The saddest part was that I'd convinced myself this transformation was love, was growth, was becoming the best version of myself. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "So what happened?" He realized it first. The memory still stung, even now. 4 months before the wedding, he sat me down and said he'd been thinking. And he wasn't sure we were right for each other. He said he'd been imagining our life together, and he couldn't picture me being happy. "And you agreed?" "I was devastated," I said honestly. Not because I was losing him, but because I was losing the life I'd built in my head. The house we'd looked at, the future we'd planned. I'd already sent out save the dates. I'd bought a dress. I'd started thinking of myself as someone who was getting married. I looked at Garrett, this man who'd been nothing but kind and genuine with me, and felt the weight of what I'd kept from him. The worst part was that he was right, I continued. I would have been miserable, but I was too scared to admit it, even to myself. So when he ended it, I was angry. I felt like he'd stolen something from me, even though what he'd actually done was save us both from a terrible mistake. "But you kept the ring." I kept the ring. I took it from his palm, feeling its familiar weight. I told myself it was because I'd earned it somehow, that I'd invested 11 months of my life in that relationship, and I deserved to have something to show for it. But really, I trailed off, finally understanding something I'd been trying not to see. Really, I kept it because I was afraid I'd never get another one. The words hung in the air between us. Garrett's expression softened, and I saw something like understanding in his eyes. "I kept it because I was afraid I'd never find someone who would want to marry me," I said, the confession coming out in a rush. And if I gave it back, it would be like admitting that those 11 months meant nothing, that I was back to being single, with no evidence that anyone had ever thought I was worth committing to. "Milani." "I know how that sounds," I said quickly. "I know it's not healthy, but I was 31 when Kenneth and I broke up, and all my friends were getting married or having babies, and I felt like I was falling behind, like I'd missed my chance somehow. The months after the breakup had been some of the darkest of my life. I'd thrown myself into work, staying late at the office, and volunteering for every project that came up, because going home to my empty apartment felt unbearable. I'd stopped dating altogether, convinced that Kenneth's assessment of our incompatibility was somehow a reflection of my fundamental unworthiness. When friends tried to set me up, I'd make excuses. When my sister asked why I wasn't putting myself out there, I'd change the subject. The ring became my secret talisman, proof that I'd been chosen once, even if it hadn't lasted. Some nights, I'd take it out and hold it, remembering what it felt like to be someone's fiancé, someone's future wife. Garrett reached for my hand. And now I'm 33 and I'm with someone who makes me laugh and who doesn't try to turn me into someone else. I looked at him, this man who had seen me at my worst and still chose to wake up next to me every morning. Someone who asked me what I want for dinner instead of just deciding for me. Someone who likes the way I tell stories, even when they're not perfect. Your stories are never perfect, he said with a small smile. That's what makes them good. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I should have told you about Kenneth, about the engagement. I should have given the ring back 2 years ago. Why didn't you? Because I was living a lie, I said. The words coming out clearer now. I was pretending that relationship didn't matter, that it hadn't affected me, but it did. It made me afraid to be myself with you, afraid that if you knew the real me, the me who'd been engaged to someone else and hadn't been enough to make it work, you'd realize you could do better. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for him to stand up and walk away. Instead, he squeezed my hand. Can I tell you something? He said. I was married before. The words hit me like a splash of cold water. What? For 2 years, in my 20s. Her name was Christina. We divorced when I was 28. I stared at him. You were married? Why didn't you tell me? Because I was embarrassed, he said simply. Because it ended badly, and I didn't want you to think I was damaged goods. Because I thought if you knew I'd failed at marriage once, you'd wonder if I was capable of making anything work. That's ridiculous, I said immediately. People get divorced all the time. It doesn't mean... I stopped, hearing my own words. Garrett raised an eyebrow. It doesn't mean what? It doesn't mean you're broken, I finished quietly. It just means you're human. Right. He smiled, but it was sad around the edges. So maybe we're both guilty of keeping secrets because we were afraid of being judged for our past relationships. I looked down at the ring in my palm, such a small thing to cause so much trouble. I need to give this back, I said. Do you want me to come with you? I considered it. The idea of facing Kenneth alone made my stomach clench, but this was something I needed to do myself. But thank you. Are you going to call him? I think I need to do it in person. If I call, it'll be too easy to chicken out. Garrett nodded. When? Today. Right now before I lose my nerve? I stood up, still holding the ring. I should have done this 2 years ago. I should have dealt with all of this instead of pretending it didn't matter. But you're dealing with it now, Garrett said. That's what matters. I kissed him, tasting the mint of his toothpaste and the salt of my own tears. I love you, I said. And I'm sorry I kept this from you. I love you too, he said. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Christina. Are we going to be okay? We're going to be honest with each other from now on, he said. That's a good start. As I got ready to leave, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked nervous, uncertain, but also determined in a way I hadn't felt in years. This was what courage looked like, I realized. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do the right thing despite being afraid. I thought about all the times I'd walked past that mirror wearing Kenneth's ring, how it had felt like a shield against the world's judgment. Now I was about to face that same world without it. And while the prospect terrified me, it also felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. An hour later, I was sitting in my car outside Kenneth's apartment building, the ring box in my purse. I'd called him from the parking lot, and he'd agreed to see me, though he'd sounded puzzled about why I wanted to meet. His apartment was exactly what I'd expected, clean, modern, expensive looking. Kenneth himself looked good too. He'd always been handsome in a conventional way, and success seemed to suit him. He offered me coffee, which I declined, and we sat in his living room making small talk about work and mutual friends. Finally, I pulled out the ring box. I came to give this back, I said, setting it on the coffee table between us. Kenneth stared at it for a long moment. I wondered if you still had it. I should have returned it 2 years ago. I'm sorry. He picked up the box, opened it, and looked at the ring. It's a nice ring, he said, almost to himself. I remember being so proud of picking it out. It is nice, I agreed. But it was never really mine. No, he said, closing the box. I suppose it wasn't. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had once cared deeply for each other, who had tried to build something together and failed, but who could now sit in the same room without anger or regret. I found myself studying Kenneth's face, looking for traces of the man I'd once planned to marry. He was there, but different somehow, more settled, more at peace with himself. I wondered if he saw the same changes in me. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Kenneth said, I heard you're seeing someone. I am. His name is Garrett. Are you happy? The question surprised me. Yes, I am. Good. He smiled. And for the first time in 2 years, it didn't make me feel angry or sad. I'm glad. Are you? Happy, I mean. I'm engaged, he said. And I felt nothing but genuine pleasure for him. Her name is Rachel. We met at a conference last year, and we just clicked. She's everything I didn't know I was looking for. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. I'm happy for you. Thank you. He set the ring box on the table. I think I'll keep this. Maybe I'll give it to my sister when she gets engaged, or maybe I'll just hold on to it. It's a good reminder of what I learned. What did you learn? That you can't build a life with someone just because they look good on paper, he said. That you can love someone and still be wrong for them. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone go. I felt tears prick at my eyes again. I learned that too. Eventually, we weren't bad people, Milani. We were just young and scared and trying to do what we thought we were supposed to do. No, I said, we weren't bad people. Before I left, Kenneth walked me to the door, and for a moment we stood there awkwardly, two people who had once shared a bed and dreams of a future together, now virtual strangers. You know, he said suddenly, I think about that night sometimes, when I called everything off. You looked so hurt, and I felt like such a coward for not being able to make it work. I shook my head. You weren't a coward. You were brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered most. I just wasn't ready to hear it then. He nodded, and I could see the relief in his eyes. I'm glad you found someone who sees you for who you really are, he said. And I'm glad you let him. I stood to leave, and Kenneth walked me to the door. Take care of yourself, he said, and I knew he meant it. You too. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe years. The secret I'd been carrying around was gone, and in its place was something that felt like freedom. Garrett was waiting for me when I got home, sitting on the couch with a book in his lap. He looked up when I walked in. How did it go? It went well, I said, curling up next to him. Really well. We talked, and I gave him the ring, and it felt like closure. Good. He's engaged to someone else, someone who sounds perfect for him. How do you feel about that? I considered the question. Happy for him, and grateful that we both figured out what we needed to figure out. Garrett set his book aside and put his arm around me. So what now? Now I want to know about Christina, I said. I want to know about your marriage and your divorce, and what you learned from it. I want to know everything about you that I don't know yet. It's not a very interesting story, he warned. I don't care. I want to hear it anyway. So he told me about Christina, who'd been his college girlfriend and then his wife, about how they'd married too young, before either of them really knew who they were, about how they'd grown apart slowly, then all at once, until they were strangers living in the same house, about the divorce, which had been sad but not bitter, and how they'd both known it was the right thing to do. I was afraid to get serious with anyone for a long time after that, he said. I was convinced I was bad at relationships, that I'd just hurt whoever I ended up with. What changed? I met you, he said simply, and for the first time in years, I wanted to try again. As he talked, I found myself marveling at how different our approaches to heartbreak had been. Where I had hidden my past, ashamed of my failure and terrified of being judged, Garrett had been open about his divorce with his friends and family, processing his grief in a healthier way. But we'd both ended up in the same place, afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to trust our own judgment, afraid to believe we deserved real love. The difference was that he'd had the courage to try again sooner, while I'd spent 2 years in emotional hibernation, clutching onto a symbol of a relationship that had never been real. I kissed him then, long and slow, tasting the honesty between us. It was different from the kisses we'd shared before, deeper somehow, more real. "I have an idea," I said when we broke apart. "Yeah. Let's go to Kelly's wedding shower, together, and when people ask how we met, or how long we've been together, or what our plans are, let's just tell them the truth. The whole truth. The whole truth about your divorce, about my broken engagement, about how we're both a little scared but trying anyway." Garrett smiled. "That sounds terrifying." "It does," I agreed, "but also kind of wonderful." And it was. At the shower, when Kelly's aunt asked about our relationship, I told her about Garrett's divorce without hesitation. When another friend asked if we were thinking about marriage, Garrett said we were taking things one day at a time, figuring ourselves out as we went along. No one seemed shocked or disappointed. If anything, people seemed to appreciate our honesty. One woman told me about her own broken engagement and how it had led her to the love of her life. Another talked about her second marriage and how much better it was than her first. "I spent so much time trying to be perfect," I told Garrett as we drove home. "Trying to be the kind of woman who had her life figured out, who made good decisions and never got hurt. And now I'm the kind of woman who makes mistakes and learns from them, who keeps engagement rings for 2 years and finally gives them back, who falls in love with divorced men and doesn't care who knows it." "That sounds like a much more interesting woman," Garrett said. "I think so too." That night, as we got ready for bed, I opened my jewelry box and looked at the space where the ring used to be. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, not regret exactly, but a kind of melancholy for the woman I'd been when I first put it there. She'd been so afraid of being alone, afraid of being judged, afraid of admitting that she'd made a mistake. She'd kept secrets because she thought they protected her, not realizing that they were actually keeping her from the very thing she wanted most. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, coming up behind me. "The woman I used to be," I said, "and how much I like the woman I'm becoming." He wrapped his arms around me, and I leaned back against his chest. In the mirror, I could see both of us, imperfect, honest, real. Two people who'd made mistakes and were trying to do better. The next morning, I woke up before Garrett and made coffee, something I'd been too nervous to do properly the day before. As I stood in the kitchen, watching the sun stream through the windows, I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not a dramatic transformation, but a series of small, honest moments. The ring was gone, but more importantly, the shame I'd carried about my past was gone too. I thought about calling my sister, maybe even my parents, to tell them about Kenneth, about the engagement they'd never known about. For the first time in years, I felt ready to be fully known by the people I loved most. 6 months later, Garrett moved into my apartment. We talked about everything: his ex-wife, my ex-fiancé, our fears about commitment, our hopes for the future. We fought sometimes, but we fought honestly, without keeping score or holding grudges. A year after that, he proposed. Not with a ring he'd chosen himself, but with a day trip to a jewelry store where we picked one out together. It was different from Kenneth's ring, simpler, more understated, more us. "Are you sure?" I asked him as I admired it on my finger. "I'm sure," he said. "Are you?" I thought about the woman I'd been, keeping secrets and living in fear. I thought about the woman I was becoming, brave enough to be honest about her mistakes and her hopes. "I'm sure," I said. And this time, I really was.